There is a very specific, very heavy kind of silence. Not like the peaceful silence of an empty room, but more like the suffocating silence of a room packed full of people who are just absolutely terrified to say out loud what every single one of them is thinking.
Oh, yeah. It is a palpable, almost physical weight in the air. I mean, we've all experienced it on some level, right? Whether in a bad meeting or, a tense family gathering.
Right.
But when the stakes are geopolitical, when stepping out of line means risking your freedom or your life, that silence becomes a literal mechanism of control. It actually shapes history.
It really does. And today we are going deep into a stack of sources brought to our attention by the writer and historian Ahmed Dayer. These documents shine a light on two overlooked historical figures from Eritrea.
Yeah, and we're looking at specific concrete moments where two individuals basically decide they were simply not going to carry the weight of that silence anymore.
Exactly. Now, real quick, I want to clarify for everyone listening, these are highly charged geopolitical histories. They involve Eritrean and Ethiopian figures and relations. But our focus today isn't on litigating the borders or the conflicts or the politics of the region. We're not taking any political sides here.
No, not at all.
Our mission is solely to act as guides, just analyzing the anatomy of defiance as it's documented by Dayer in these texts. We're looking at the human mechanics of courage.
I think that framing is essential. By treating these accounts as like case studies in human behavior, we can dissect the anatomy of these specific moments without getting lost in the broader politics.
Right.
We want to understand what these two men actually did under immense pressure and how their seemingly isolated actions rippled outward to affect the psychology of their entire communities.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core theme running through these sources is, it's universally compelling. What happens when ordinary individuals refuse to play along with the illusion of overwhelming power?
Yeah, and to get to the bottom of this, we're going to look at two distinct generations, starting with a man named Kantiba Fakak, and then moving forward in time to a young man named Halibay.
Both of these men were pushed into a corner by authority figures, and, well, both pushed back in ways that permanently altered the atmosphere around them.
They did. And to understand the magnitude of Kantiba Fakak's actions, we first need to look at his structural role in society.
Okay.
According to the sources, Fakak had been the leader of the Beitjuk, which is a prominent local community, having succeeded his father in that role in 1952.
Oh, so he's not just some newcomer.
Right. This detail matters immensely. He is not a rogue outsider or like an anonymous agitator. He's a man of established status. He carries the weight of generational, localized, organic leadership. His community literally looks to him for survival cues.
So the sources paint here is incredibly tense. You have the Governor General, Asrate Kassa, visiting the region, and he convenes this massive meeting of all the local leaders.
Yeah, huge gathering.
And the Governor General's mandate is super clear. He wants these local leaders to leverage their influence to convince the rebels in the area to return and essentially just stand down. He's demanding that they do the government's heavy lifting.
And you have to realize the power dynamic is entirely lopsided here.
Yeah.
The Governor General represents this massive, centralized apparatus of power, right?
Yeah.
And he's issuing a directive to people whose daily lives he can easily disrupt or just outright destroy. So he makes his demand, and that heavy, suffocating silence you mentioned earlier, it just descends on the room.
Nobody wants to draw attention to themselves. I always try to visualize these historical moments in a modern context, you know? It feels a bit like one of those high-stakes corporate town halls where a completely out-of-touch CEO is demanding impossible quotas.
Oh, absolutely.
And everyone in the auditorium is just staring at their shoes, hoping to fade into the upholstery. The survival instinct in those moments is just to nod and survive the hour. But Kantiba Fakak actually stepped up to the microphone.
He does.
He breaks the silence and asks what incentive is going to be offered to these rebels to encourage their return. So what makes Fakak's specific demand so dangerous in this context?
What's fascinating here is that it's a highly pragmatic question. But in a room built on absolute compliance, pragmatism is dangerous. By asking for the incentive, Fakak is challenging the fundamental premise of the meeting.
He's not just taking orders.
Exactly. He is refusing to accept the Governor General's authority as absolute. He's introducing the concept of negotiation into a space where, frankly, only obedience was expected.
And the Governor General turns it back on him, right? He asks Fakak for his proposal. And what stands out in the source material here isn't just the defiance, but the very specific nature of Fakak's demand.
Yeah, this card is incredible.
Fakak says they need to hang the flag for them. He is talking about the Eritrean flag, which had been previously lowered and replaced by the Ethiopian flag. You'd kind of expect a local leader to ask for tangible concessions like land rights, financial amnesty, maybe a guarantee of safety.
But he asks for a piece of cloth to be put back on a pole,
Right.
because the mechanics of symbolic dominance are at play here. Fakak is not asking for a logistical compromise. He's demanding a restoration of identity.
Wow.
The lowering of a flag is a calculated psychological tactic. It's meant to erase a people's visual autonomy and dignity. It tells the local population every single time they look up who's in charge.
So by demanding it back.
By demanding the flag be restored, Fakak is publicly rejecting that visual dominance. He is telling the most powerful man in the room that the rebels, and really by extension the community, will not simply integrate into a system that has visually erased them.
And the rhetoric that follows is just like a high-stakes chess match.
Yeah.
The Governor General, Asrate Kassa, dismisses this demand with a very specific metaphor. He tells Fakak that restoring the flag is further for them than the sky.
It's such a calculated statement. It's engineered to emphasize absolute unshakable power. By comparing his decision to the sky, the Governor General is claiming that his authority is an unchangeable law of nature. I mean, you cannot negotiate with the sky. It's a rhetorical strategy designed to make the listener feel incredibly small and powerless.
But Fakak does not flinch. He fires right back, saying, and their return is also not closer than the sky.
Brilliant.
He takes the Governor General's own metaphor of absolute impossibility and weaponizes it against the government's demands. It is a complete tactical neutralization.
By reflecting the metaphor back, Fakak establishes a complete stalemate. He proves that the Governor General's demands are just as detached from reality as the government perceives the rebels' demands to be. It is just a masterclass in holding one's ground.
Unsurprisingly, though, Asrate Kassa is furious at being embarrassed in a room full of subordinates. The sources say he threatens to strip Fakak of his leadership position entirely.
And Fakak delivers this incredibly grounded final blow.
Yes. He tells the Governor General that he does not care if he is stripped of his title because whoever comes after me is from my family and not you.
That line right there dissects the fundamental difference between imposed authority and organic leadership. Fakak is exposing a huge vulnerability in the Governor General's power.
Because they can't just mandate away his family.
Exactly. The government can issue a decree to remove a title, sure, but they cannot legislate away bloodlines, history, or the deep-seated respect a community holds for a specific family. Fakak is reminding him that administrative power has severe limits when it comes up against cultural roots.
I want to push back on this a little bit, though, and look at the practical reality of what happens next. Fakak wins the argument. He gets the incredible quote. He humbles the Governor General in front of everyone, but the sources tell us he was imprisoned for a very long period and eventually passed away in 1973.
Yeah, that's the harsh reality of it.
So what does this all mean for him practically? He gets a great quote, but he pays a terrible price, right? From a purely tactical standpoint, didn't he just destroy his own life? He loses his freedom, his ability to lead his family, and nothing changes about the flag.
Well, if you evaluate the situation on a timeline of, say, weeks or months, it looks like a devastating defeat. Fakak absorbed the full, brutal weight of the state's retaliation, but historical impact rarely operates on a short timeline.
Okay, fair point.
The sources explicitly state that his defiance became a massive point of pride for the people of the region. He transformed from a local leader into a symbol of resilience. The vacuum left by his imprisonment actually amplified his message.
It's the idea that you can lock up the man, but the story of what he did in that room just keeps circulating.
More than just circulating, it functions as a psychological crowbar. Authoritarian power relies heavily on the illusion of invincibility. When the room is silent, the power seems absolute.
But when someone speaks up...
Exactly. When one person stands up and stress tests the system in real time, even if they're crushed by it, the illusion of absolute control crumbles. The people in that room saw the Governor General lose a battle of wits. Fakak absorbed the punishment so that the psychological barrier of fear could be dismantled for everyone else. He showed the next generation that the system could be challenged.
And that shattered illusion didn't just fade away with Fakak's imprisonment, it became a blueprint.
Yeah.
We see the exact same psychological barrier broken just 1 year after Fakak dies in prison. We're now in 1974, and this brings us to the story of a young man named Halibay.
Who clearly absorbed the cultural lesson of defiance.
Definitely.
The demographic shift is vital to note here too. Fakak was an established patriarch protecting his lineage, said Halibay is described in the text as a young man at the time.
And the setting is completely different.
Yeah, the arena has changed. We moved from a closed-door meeting of leaders to a massive public rally in the city of Karen.
The scale of this event is huge. General Aman Andom is giving a major speech to the crowd. Similar to the previous story, he's urging the attendees to convince the rebels to return, promising peace and stability. And the crowd is giving him a massive, loud round of applause. Everyone is clapping along.
It is the ultimate display of manufactured consent. In highly monitored environments, applause is rarely an expression of genuine approval.
It's just safer to clap.
It's a survival reflex. The crowd applauds to show compliance, to avoid standing out, and to maintain the fragile status quo of their daily lives.
Well, into this sea of performative applause stands, said Halibay. He literally interrupts the clapping. He starts speaking out about the specific injustices happening locally, and immediately his microphone is cut off. Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Cutting the microphone is such a sterile, modern mechanism of silencing. You don't have to deploy guards or cause a physical scene. You just sever the power to their voice, leaving them looking isolated and foolish.
Right, and you'd think a powerful general, having just been publicly interrupted in the middle of a victory lap, would just have him dragged off in handcuffs. It's like interrupting a politician's carefully orchestrated speech to point out that the emperor has no clothes. But the reaction from General Andom totally surprised me.
Oh, it's very unexpected.
Instead of removing Halibay, the general actually invites him up to the stage. It almost feels like a calculated psychological move to co-opt his rebellion. Or maybe it was just sheer shock that someone actually called his bluff.
This raises an important question about the nature of power. Why did the general react with respect rather than anger? It's likely a mixture of both shock and calculation. General Andom was undoubtedly aware that the applause he was receiving was hollow.
Because powerful people usually know when they're being flattered out of fear.
Exactly. But when Halibay is brought to the stage, he doesn't use the opportunity to apologize or soften his stance. He looks directly at the general and delivers a blunt truth. You know that everyone applauding you here has no ability to convince the rebels. Rather, you must do that yourselves.
Oh man, he forces the unspoken reality of the entire rally out into the open. He's looking at the general and basically saying, you know this is fake, I know this is fake, so why are we forcing all these people to participate in the charade?
Halibay pierces the bubble of sycophancy. And surprisingly, the texts reveal that the general was deeply impressed by this young man's raw honesty. It takes a specific kind of audacity to stand on a stage next to a military leader and deconstruct their propaganda in real time.
Yeah, that takes guts.
And the general respected it so much that he invited Halibay to a dinner in his honor and gave explicit instructions to the security forces that this young man was not to be harmed.
On paper, that reads like a cinematic happy ending. You know, the brave youth speaks truth to power, the general recognizes his courage, they share a meal, and the youth is protected.
But the machinery of a state does not stop grinding just because a general has a moment of personal respect for a dissident.
Right, because the reality on the ground is entirely different. The source material notes that despite the general's explicit orders, the local residents, the people who actually have to navigate the daily reality of local law enforcement, they knew exactly how the system worked.
They knew he wasn't safe.
Exactly. They advised Halibay to leave the area immediately because a promise from a general in a dining room means very little to a local police officer holding a grudge.
This really highlights the disconnect between high-level decrees and ground-level enforcement. The local community understood that Halibay had made himself a target. His defiance was just too public. So his reward for incredible bravery is basically going into exile.
He relocates to a place called Ali Gaider. And his life there is not glamorous. He isn't living as some celebrated political dissident writing memoirs. He is literally scraping by selling vegetables.
Just trying to survive.
And even in this new town doing menial work, he's constantly harassed by the municipal workers. It isn't a dramatic midnight arrest. It's just mundane, bureaucratic punishment.
It's important to understand the mechanics of this kind of harassment. Bureaucratic systems are incredibly efficient at punishing dissent without ever needing to file formal charges.
Right. They just make life hard.
They use municipal codes, petty fines, permit denials, and just constant administrative friction to make daily survival exhausting. It's death by 1,000 administrative cuts. The goal is to grind the individual down financially and psychologically, making them an example to anyone else who might think of speaking up.
Reading through that section of Dayer's text, I found myself looking for the silver lining and coming up empty. It seems like doing the right thing just earned him a life on the run. Where is the payoff for his courage? He stood up to a general, and it earned him a life selling vegetables and being endlessly harassed by low-level bureaucrats. It feels deeply cynical.
I completely understand why it feels that way. But this is where the historical account provides a really profound illustration of how bravery travels through a culture. The payoff for defiance is rarely immediate and is almost never material. The payoff is the cultural echo. Eventually, the administrative harassment in Alligator forces Halibay to move again, this time to a town called Tessane. And it's there that he encounters a local official named Agil Abdul-Rahman.
And this encounter completely shifts the trajectory of Halibay's life. Abdul-Rahman recognizes Halibay, but not because they had ever met before. He recognizes him entirely based on his reputation. The story of what the young man did at the Karen rally had traveled ahead of him.
It acts as a beacon. Halibay's reputation as the man who spoke the truth to General Andom preceded him. When he finally crosses paths with another person of integrity, Abdul-Rahman, that reputation becomes a literal shield.
Abdul-Rahman gives him an absolute guarantee of safety. The quote in the source is beautiful in its simplicity. He tells Halibay, "Rest assured, even if you laid out vegetables in front of my office here, no one will be able to harass you."
Think about the mechanics of what just happened there. Halibay's initial courage in Karen didn't stop the conflict, and it didn't reform the government, but it signaled to other principled people that they were not alone.
It found its audience eventually.
Right. When Abdul-Rahman heard that story, it likely strengthened his own resolve. When Halibay arrived in his jurisdiction, Abdul-Rahman essentially said, "I know what you risked, and because you were brave enough to stand up then, I'm going to be brave enough to protect you now." Courage is highly contagious, even across distances.
Bringing these two accounts from Ahmed Dayer together really reveals a fascinating through line. You start with Kantiba Fakak, an established leader who sacrifices his freedom and ultimately his life over a piece of cloth because he understands the mechanics of visual dominance.
Yes, he stress tests the system and establishes a baseline of pride for his community.
Then, a generation later, said Halibay, a young man who grew up in the atmosphere Fakak helped create, he refuses to participate in the manufactured consent of a rally. And his courage ripples outward, surviving administrative harassment until it finds an ally in a totally different city.
The overarching narrative here is that the machinery of compliance is massive and intimidating, but it's ultimately fragile. It requires absolute, unbroken participation to function.
One break in the chain and it falters.
Exactly. When Fakak said no to the Governor General and when Halibay interrupted the applause, they threw a wrench into that machinery. They demonstrated that the narrative of absolute control was just a fiction maintained by silence.
It makes you look at the dynamics of your own life a bit differently. Obviously, you, listening right now, are likely not facing the life-and-death geopolitical stakes that Fakak and Halibay navigated, but the underlying mechanics of compliance are everywhere.
They really are.
It makes you think about the environments you navigate, like your workplace, your community, your institutions. Where do you feel that subtle pressure to simply applaud and stay silent? Where is the pressure to go along with a narrative, is fundamentally flawed simply because the administrative friction of speaking up is just too exhausting?
And perhaps more importantly, whose voices around you are being quietly muted, much like the histories Ahmed Dayer has worked to bring to the surface. Those are exactly the questions these historical accounts demand we ask. History is so frequently written by the generals who stand on the stages and the governors who mandate the meetings. But the actual resilience of a culture is forged by the people who interrupt the applause.
Yeah, the ones who break the silence.
When one person speaks up, the personal cost is often incredibly high. They might face the modern equivalent of exile or systemic harassment. But in doing so, they permanently alter the atmosphere of fear for everyone else in the room. They prove that silence is a choice.
They show that the system can be challenged.
Which leaves us with a critical and perhaps unsettling thought to consider as we wrap up this deep dive. Fakak and Halibay had to look authority in the eye, in a physical room, surrounded by people who could see their faces and hear their voices.
But today, our public squares are largely digital.
Right. Dissent is often anonymized, and confrontation happens through screens. Consider how this shifts the mechanics of courage. In an age where we don't have to stand up in a physical auditorium to interrupt the applause, have we actually made it easier to be courageous? Or by moving our defiance into isolated digital spaces, Have we just made it easier for the authorities to quietly hit the mute button on our microphones without anyone else in the room ever noticing? What invisible atmospheres of fear exist in our world today, just waiting for one person to ask for the microphone?
Man, that is a fascinating angle and definitely something to chew on. Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration of history and the anatomy of courage. We will catch you on the next deep dive.